B2B marketers, welcome to B2Beacon's first installment of our Leadership in Luminary series. I'm Kahlow, your host, CEO of BusinessOnline, and Chief Editor of B2Beacon. So we are here today in Chicago, the Windy City, which happens to be host to one of the largest and most respected B2B marketing events in the world and associations, the BMA. And I'm here with some fantastic women in digital marketing today. I've got Sandra Zoratti, who is the CMO of the Marketing Network, as well as president of the Colorado chapter of the BMA. We have Jill Rowley, who is the social selling evangelist, as well as named top 30 for Forbes' most important influential women of social selling, or people of social selling, if you will. Is
Correct.
that fair?
Number 3 out of the top 30 and the only woman in the top 10.
Well, there you go.
Not to be, obsessive
Well,
about it.
that's why you're here today. And we have Carla Johnson, who's president of Type A, which is a content marketing agency, as well as a BMA national board member.
Type A Communications.
Type A Communications. There we have it. Ladies, thanks for joining us today. This should be an absolute pleasure. So the premise is this. Account-based marketing is hot. It's on fire in the B2B marketing world. Everyone wants to know how to do it and what it's all about. So my question to you is, first and foremost, do you see the fever that I see around this notion of account-based marketing with the folks that you interact with on a daily basis? Sandra?
Yeah, I think we're so overwhelmed by content which has gotten out of control. Marketers are guilty, right? We've thrown a lot of content out there and no one's listening. So getting someone's attention is number one. And the way you can do it by targeting and having more personal conversations in account-based marketing, to me, is the way to cut through the clutter and really be heard and stand out.
Okay, love it. Jill?
Yeah, it's about being personal and relevant and knowing your ideal customer profile and then talking to them in a very market of one way. And so account-based marketing allows you to personalize at the industry level, at the company level, and at the person level. And I think it's a brilliant way to create markets of one and to personalize the communication to your buyer.
Carla, if you would do our audience a favor and in your own words, how would you define account-based marketing?
I see it as a change in philosophy of how we interact with our customers. So it's not just about a group of people selling products within a company. So it's looking at that company holistically as a customer. And so you're approaching them with one type of message and as one company rather than this sporadic right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing kind of thing.
Sure. And
creating disruption in that way. It's much more of a relationship building with the group from your own company with your customer's company.
So let me grab that concept and peel it back a layer deeper. So I think one of the things you hit upon was this notion of alignment.
Right.
Organizations have to be aligned around how they're going to actually sell and engage with the customer base. So I'd love to hear from your experiences where we're finding, first, the dysfunction specifically around sales and marketing and alignment, and then second, where you've seen it to be successful and what are the actual conversations people are having. And maybe I'd flip that right back over to you.
Sure, and I think one of the biggest situations that account-based marketing helps is that if you're going to be successful at it, you have to understand the business goals and objectives and strategies of your customers, right? So in order to do that, you have to know, and you have to talk beyond just what it is you sell and what you do, but the difference that you're making. So it requires sales and marketing people to have a different perspective about the work that they do. They have to be able to talk on a business and strategic level, not on a product and service level.
So if I could pull that thread, it's almost leveraging the word of empathy. You have to truly understand what's the needs of your customers before you actually begin to pitch anything in front of them. Agree, disagree?
I agree. I think that, though, the alignment in account-based marketing between sales and marketing has to happen sooner. I think a lot of us think in terms of the funnel, and at the top of the funnel, there being suspects, converting them to prospects, and once they're a prospect, handing them over to sales to qualify an opportunity, and then sales goes and closes the deal. But from an account-based marketing perspective, sales and marketing have to actually align at the top of the funnel and together bring that buyer through the buying process at every stage. I think account-based marketing really helps sales come in early and really create some of that messaging mutually with marketing, and it also means that marketing's job is never done in bringing that buyer to become a customer and ultimately an advocate.
You agree that marketing doesn't really ever leave the room in this case, which they shouldn't anyway, but I think this is showing them how much more important it is to stay as a part of the conversation through customer and retention.
I think marketing and sales alignment comes down to this. 5 years ago, marketing owned 30% of the funnel, the customer engaged, it was given over to sales. Today, it's the exact inverse. Marketing owns 70% of the progression through the funnel. You don't even know customers are looking at your stuff, and then it gets handed over to sales. Here is the opportunity for marketing and sales to collaborate in really new ways, because there's so much more focus on inbound marketing and using content to draw people to you, but it has to be the right content based on 160 or 360-degree view of that person, or at least your best guess to start, and then you get finer and finer details. So I think it's about a new opportunity to collaborate between marketing and sales. They have forever had their challenges with connecting, and now is the time, from my perspective, for that to happen.
What have you seen, Sandra, in terms of the most successful type of language when you see two sales and marketing executives discuss their objectives and their mutual goals? Like, what are they actually saying?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. A few years ago, I heard the CMO of Samsung talk, and she said, you know what? My sales leader keeps saying, I need sales support, I need sales support, I need content. So I went to my CEO and said, I deliver sales support. She leaned into the wind, delivered what sales needed, and then was able to progress the relationship to do maybe some more sophisticated things that say, okay, it's a longer term path, but I've got you covered in front of the customer. Now let's work together on the prospect and how we attract new prospects into the pipeline. So to me, it was really meeting the sales leader at their point of need before you go into trying to go for a longer pipeline.
So give a little first. Carla?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's ideal, but I don't think that's what marketing people are doing right now. And I've seen the statistic about marketing owning 70% of that funnel, but I don't agree that that's what's happening with marketing. I think they are still very much top of funnel focused because they don't want to take accountability for that middle of the funnel, and I think they're stuck. And I still think that's a big part that's underserved. And I think marketing isn't yet willing or maybe able or feels comfortable with being with stepping up and taking ownership of that middle.
So is that a notion of risk aversion? Are we as marketers afraid to put ourselves in the direct target to business outcomes in terms of revenue or margin? You know, I had a great conversation with Jeff this morning. He said not only should we be in the direct line of revenue, but we should also be in the direct line of margin. Jill?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I think if compensation models change, I think behavior
Show me the money.
change.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
I think it's show me the money. And I got really passionate this morning in my pre-conference session around social selling that marketers are severely underpaid. If you do agree or believe that buyers are 57, 67, 77% through their buying process before they engage with sales, and that's completely opposite of what it used to be, why are we not shifting compensation from quota-carrying salespeople now only managing 30% of the buying process to marketing managing 70%? And I am on a mission of transforming how we compensate not just marketing and sales and moving some of that money from sales to marketing, but also compensating everyone in the organization who contributes to customer advocacy.
Let me ask you this. And if I were to channel Ian Heller, who was here this morning from HT Supply, he would say that only works, and I like this point, that only works if you're willing to be fired if you don't hit your quota the same way a salesperson would. Like, you're willing to take
Fair
that
point.
responsibility and risk, if you will.
Absolutely.
But I think there's a point where marketing has not had to have that responsibility of quota that sales has had before. And so what they do, stumble, fall, fail miserably, there's not the same consequences for marketing and sales.
There isn't. Yep.
Yeah. And maybe
Is it? Should there be? Actually, maybe that's my question. Should there be?
But there has to be a longer term approach. So there has to be a longer term perspective. And that's what's been so hard about even me evangelizing social selling is that this is about building relationships, using social networks, and relationships take time. Nobody gets married on the first date. Usually I say gets laid, but you know, I didn't think that would be appropriate for your
Well, here we
interview.
are, and it's been said. So.
Oh, it was said, that's right.
And captured.
Oh, yeah.
And captured. But it's about building relationships. And And when you are a salesperson and you have a quarterly or even a monthly number that you're held accountable for, and you only have X numbers of quarters that you can miss your number before you're fired, then we focus on the close and not on the advocacy. We focus on the commission check and not on the advocacy. And so I think if we're going to move into a new world where we're more equally compensated for the risk and the reward,
Sure.
then we have to actually step back and have a time period for
We need
adjustment.
patience in understanding that there's going to be latency to those these new responsibilities actually panning out in terms of business
Right, exactly.
outcomes.
To Jill's point, you can't change behavior when you reward on something else.
Yep, no, that's a great point. So let's pivot for a second. And there was something that actually you mentioned, Sandra, around content, and content being a huge part of what is B2B marketing these days, and shifting from advertising to publishing it. And I think the most important piece there is insights. How do you find the insights you need to develop the content that's going to be successful in account-based marketing? What do we do?
Well, you need to use data, and everybody thinks data is based on all these hard, cold facts, and it doesn't give you the emotional insights, and I argue otherwise.
How so?
I think data helps you find the people who might have an interest in what you can provide, and then you can use data to target those people with the messaging you think will resonate. And as you begin to engage, you develop emotional intelligence around those individuals. So that's how you develop and deepen the relationship and really get engagement. So you sort of start with data, IQ, and then you move it to EQ, emotional intelligence.
How are you measuring EQ? That's an interesting concept.
Well, I don't know exactly how to measure it except to say engagement and the relationship progression is a key measure. But since you asked about measurement, I will say I think a marketer today who doesn't sign up for revenue as a measure of success is probably one who's missing the boat.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jill, being very steeped in the social selling world, how do you find the insights to be relevant to the conversations you're having with your prospects or on behalf of your clients' prospects?
Yeah. So you started with content, and content is the currency of the modern marketer. It's also the currency of the modern sales professional. And I'm actually have always been someone who uses content as my way to circle back, check in. A lot of salespeople circle back and check in based on their quarter getting closer and closer to the end, versus I would read what my buyers read and share that content across my social networks.
How do you scale that? If you're reading what your buyers read, you're reading a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's my job, because the old pitchy, selly, always be closing isn't working anymore. And so for me to have a conversation that leads with insight and value, that I am a trusted expert to my buyer, that I know the world in which my buyer lives, I need to read B2B Magazine. I need to read Chief Content Officer Magazine. I need to listen to your podcast. I need to watch YouTube videos of Beth Comstock at GE. If she is my potential buyer, I need to get in her head. And so I need to be a content connoisseur as a sales professional.
Sure.
And marketing can really support sales people in this initiative.
But my big question to that is, and it's hard to argue that you want to be digesting what your prospects are digesting so you can understand their frameworks and their mindset, but can you scale that? Can you deliver that if you're a rep that's in charge of 100 accounts or 50 accounts, where that may be? Does that notion of social insights scale, Carla?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. So 90% of the content that marketers produce is never looked at, never seen by sales or the customer. So
What
I
a
think
travesty.
It is. But I
Yes, it
think
is.
marketers are in this habitual publish. I mean, from a media perspective, they're publishing, but nobody's reading. So what they're also doing is that they're not looking at the content that they're producing as a digital conversation. So they're looking, if you looked at how marketers behaved with their customers, all they're doing is talking at them, turning around, talking at them, turning around. They're not having a conversation. So what's missing and how you start to get those insights are that you have these conversations with customers and you adjust content along the way to respond. But unless you really have that two-way conversation, And I hear lots of people say, brand storytelling, super important. It is important, but there's also the time where you have to listen to your customers. Because unless you listen to your customers deeply, then you're not going to know how to adjust that conversation. So then when you talk about scale,
Yep.
so I look at HP. They have, a friend of mine is their director of sales enablement. So what they've actually done is created a sales enablement team that works between marketing communications and product development and sales. And so they're this hub. And so when sales says, I need something, instead of having the salesperson spend time looking for it, they actually have this sales enablement group go out, put it together, because they see the value of having someone on this team put together all of this information on a scaled size and delivering it to salespeople rather than taking those salespeople out of the field to put it together.
I love it. So when we're hunting down these insights, are we looking in the right places? Are we looking at the right information? Are we having the right conversations? And my question would be, where have you seen it to be very successful? Where have you seen people really nail that salient insight that makes for a successful account-based marketing campaign, if you will?
Well, it's really complex, as you're indicating. Yep. I mean, we started out with database data, and now we've got all the social listening tools and all of this non-conforming data to sort of roll into the picture. And I think the only way to do this feasibly is to really do it iteratively. So the concept of agile marketing is really popular just because of that. Mm-hmm. So it's a continuous improvement. You take some data, you make your best guess. You send the content you think will engage, and you start the conversation. And every time you have an interaction, you're going to be smarter and smarter and learn more, and you can append your database and really hone in on what engagement is really working on a specific person-to-person or account-by-account.
Yep. Well, let me ask you this then. I think we mentioned the notion of conversations or engagement a number of times. Why is it so hard for marketers to listen? Because if the key ingredient to engagement as a conversation is listening, why don't we listen better? Carla,
I think it's
ready
because,
to jump on this.
Well, I say this because most marketing people have never been in sales. And I remember when I first went from marketing to sales and sat down the first time in front of a customer with what I thought was fabulous information, I wouldn't even put it on the table because I realized it's in that point of proof, or the point of where the rubber hits the road, mm-hmm. that me as a marketer did not know and could not know what that salesperson really needed because I wasn't a salesperson. And I think until marketers really understand what salespeople are going through and the conversations that they're having, they're going to have trouble with this. So regardless of the data, I think there's a lot of misinformation and wrong decisions that are made based on data because marketers haven't sat down with the sales team and said, here's what the data says, but what is it that you're actually seeing in the field? Does this make sense? Is what the numbers telling us look accurate? What are you hearing? It is those old-fashioned,
sure.
Let's sit at a table and have real people kind of conversations about what's going on with salespeople, but also with customers. Because when sales is that in-between between the customer and marketing, there's a whole lot that sales doesn't hear that marketing needs to hear that's missed, and it affects performance.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Jill, seems to...
Well, I think there's the element of listening requires technology, and technology doesn't do anything without an operator behind it typically, right? So we're seeing marketing becoming overwhelmed with the number of tools and platforms. There's Scott Brinker, he's actually speaking at the conference on Friday. He has a chief marketing technologist blog. He's absolutely brilliant, and he's been this graph of 948 or 966 technologies that marketing has to manage today. That's up from 100 3 years ago. Mm. And remember, marketing used to be more messaging and branding and creative and colors and content, not technology and process and automation and scale. And so marketing to listen effectively across the social web, you've got to use new tools, which probably means you need new people on your team with different skill sets. I think sometimes it's just a lack of the right resources to do the actual job that needs to be done.
Even the understanding of what resources are necessary, asking the right questions.
I think you have to know the job that has to be done first before you know the resources that you need to do.
Sure. Okay, slight pivot. Sandra, tell me about one of the most successful account-based marketing campaigns you've either executed or you've seen happen out there, and what did they do? What made it work?
I can refer to one that started out as a disaster and turned into something
Even
that
better,
worked.
right? That's how we learn, right? You got to fail. Yes, I love it.
So there was a campaign that was run targeting CMOs, and it was with a data-driven solution. And so we sent out a campaign and got almost no response back. And what we learned through that experience was CMOs were not self-identifying by a solution that could apply to any one of them. They were self-identifying by industry. So we changed our whole approach and used industry-based research to generate content by industry, use industry vernacular, and then do an outreach to try to connect and draw people to us who are interested in that topic. So the example in that one is we did a study in the insurance industry,
Okay.
and within a couple weeks we had one of the CMOs from the largest insurers call us and invite us to go meet with him and sit around his table with 11 of his executives. Not because we reached out to him, but because we were speaking in his language,
Sure.
and he connected with it right away, and he knew that we could have a conversation around what he cared about most deeply. And the other reason this worked is we talked to his customers. We said, here's what CMOs in the insurance industry care about, but here's really what the consumers are saying, and there's a gap. Let's talk about that gap and how to close that gap.
Insights, relevancy, value, right? You understood the insights at some point from the learning, you delivered something ultra relevant that had value when it landed on their desk.
Yep.
Fantastic. Anyone else have any good examples that they've seen from an account-based marketing perspective?
You know, I like to watch what Motorola Solutions does, because what I've seen them do is they bring together sales and marketing, but they also look at PR, they look at technology, they look at research and development to really say, okay, from a marketing perspective, are we talking too far ahead of what we can sell and deliver? And if we say
great
we're going to
question.
sell this,
Yeah.
you know, can we actually deliver it and what's the time frame? So I think it's very smart. It's not just sales and marketing that has to align, it's everything within the organization that serves the customer.
Jill?
Yeah. I can just give some generic examples of, I'm a big fan of tools like Demandbase and Bizzo, and HubSpot, in fact. I was actually over the weekend listening to their keynote from their inbound conference last year, and they created this content optimization tool that essentially, you know, the CEO, Brian Halligan, was talking about how they had this campaign and the call to action was to drive them to the website when it was, let's just call it a suspect. And when that suspect went to the website, they got this this experience of the website, version A of the experience. And then as that buyer progressed and became part of the sales funnel, and they marketed to that buyer again and drove him back to the corporate website, experience A. And then as that buyer bought and became a customer and drove them back to the corporate website, the buyer experienced experience A. Like that website, that corporate website never changed, even though the buyer was at a different stage in the buying process and in fact had become a customer. And so now we have to start thinking about not just landing pages and pieces of content being more relevant and timely and personalized to the buyer, but that corporate website,
Experiences, yep.
the whole entire experience. And
Yep.
so the phenomenal thing is that there are tools and technologies that these companies are creating to create that dynamic experience that can vary based on industry, based on company, based on individual, the buyer persona, based on whatever, where they are in the buying cycle.
Yep.
So the technology is catching up to the ideas that were started back, I think ITSA is one of the first analyst companies. ITSMA?
IT sales and marketing?
Yes, ITSMA. I put marketing before sales. ITSMA, and then also Serious Decisions has some great research. But the tools are catching up to the concepts, is what's happening.
I have one other that I thought of,
Sure.
I think is a great
Please.
example. It's Young Presidents Organization. And what they do is pretty extraordinary. they connect with CEOs. And what they do to connect with the CEOs is they understand how can I help them in their business, in their industry, with nonprofits they're passionate about, and how can I have events for their spouses and families as they'd be interested. So they look at the individual as a total human being, and they connect on as many levels with that human being as they can. The reason I wanted to mention this example is I see B2B marketing going through a transformation.
Yep.
We don't sell to a business, we sell to an individual, and when they write us a check, they're signing the check as a representative of the company versus a personal check. But it's still a human being, and I see B2B marketers really stepping up to embrace this. It's not easy, but understanding that human being holistically, not just from a business perspective, to me is going to be the best account-based approach you can adopt.
I love it. And if I could pull that thread just one layer deeper, is while we're selling to people, we're also selling to multiple people, especially in the business buying journey, if you will. And the question becomes, how do you become relevant to every influencer in that process from an account-based marketing perspective in that buying journey at scale? That's not easy, right? What are
But you have to
so
be
what
relevant.
are-
You have
so
to.
how do you do it? What are the frameworks that you think about when you're planning that? When you're planning an account-based marketing campaign around those multiple influencers, Carla?
Well, I think a big part is that you have to actually have very detailed, relevant personas, because there are so many marketers who
Sure.
don't use personas, or if they have them, they don't share them with sales, which I'm always amazed about, because personas deliver insights to salespeople too that they didn't know.
Yep.
So maybe that persona for a buyer, you're not able to get to that buyer, but then you need to know who's influencing that person. And that's who you have to target if you can't get directly to that decision maker.
Yep. Because that notion of social proof persuasion can become the largest tipping point in that buying process.
That's
If someone
right.
has forwarded something on from someone they trust, right, Jill?
Well, it is. It's if you look at the Edelman Trust Survey, buyers trust companies at about 33%. Buyers trust other buyers at 92%. Power to the people. And so also, if you think about, you're talking about the buying committee, it's not just the buying committee in the conference room anymore. There's a virtual extension to the buying committee of people in social networks. And so I'll give an example, very specific example, where salespeople have traditionally held on to their references until the end of the customer's buying process, until the customer proved that they had budget, authority, need, and time frame, and that vendor was on the short list. Well, the reality is that buying committee, there's a virtual extension, and they've already gone out to LinkedIn, and they've searched on the 300 million members, professional members of LinkedIn, and searched on Eloqua, Marketo. Those are two different marketing automation software companies, and that buyer had narrowed it down to Eloqua and Marketo, and they wanted to find other people that had experience with both products, and then contact those individuals for their authentic endorsement or lack thereof, or differentiation of why Marketo, why Eloqua. And so the whole buying process, we're living in the age of the customer, not the age of the seller.
Yep.
Information is now available, and people are now accessible to buyers, where the sales and the marketing teams have lost control. And you asked, why does marketing struggle with some of these things? And it's, I think it's a control issue. I think from a messaging, controlling the message.
We've typically had the ability to talk about what we wanted to talk about, how we wanted to talk about it, in the vehicles we wanted to deliver that over the years, and that has shifted in a major way over the last just couple of years, right? I mean, I think that's
Customers
where we-
have choice,
Yep.
and they have voice. And so if a salesperson overpromises and underdelivers, negative Nancy, the customer, takes to social media
no
and
one
talks
no one
about,
wants that.
you don't want you want positive Patty.
I love it. So I could go on probably for the next 2 hours on this topic, but I know we all have to be somewhere. So if we could take maybe the next 30 seconds each to wrap up, what what advice you would give our folks out there in terms of what they should be doing but they're not doing in relation to account-based marketing in the B2B marketing world, if you will. What do they need to be thinking about? What frameworks, what tactics, what just general advice do you think is important for these folks to know? Who wants to grab that? You guys look at me like
I'll go.
Okay, Sandra.
Yeah, number one, leverage insights. Data is your friend, but what you do with the data is most important. Number two, in order to scale and connect, be the hub. Be the thing that brings together interested parties with common interests and build that collaboration and connectivity and reaching that ecosystem of influencers, advocates, and potential buyers. To me, if you just do those two things, it's a great start.
I love it. Jill?
I would use the frameworks and methodologies that already exist from the analysts I've already mentioned. And so I would actually go get religion on existing framework and methodology from a Serious Decisions or an ITSMA, and or there are certain technology vendors who support account-based marketing. And so I would go and consume as much content about the topic of account-based marketing before you start to try to do account-based marketing.
Well, and I would say what you have to do before you do any of this is establish a mindset that this is change management that we're going through. It's not just saying we're going to act differently. You have to think differently first before you can act differently. And so really to bring about this kind of change, you have to realize that you're changing mindsets, not just skill sets.
That was fantastic. Carla, Jill, Sandra, thank you so much.
Thanks, Thad.
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Nice
Thad.
job,
Thank you.
ladies.